Dale Webster. I've been here getting on for 10 years now. And since I've been here, I've become a painter. But before I came here, I was a lecturer in art history. And before that, I was a lecturer in philosophy. And when I lectured in art history, what really interested me from my graduate days was what a picture is. And of course why it's made and for what purpose we form. So, when I taught philosophy, what interested me was what we are as human beings. What are we? Since I started painting, I've kind of managed to wrap those two issues together, which is rather nice. But what I want to do for you today, if I can, is show you just how closely those two questions are related. What we are and what a picture is. I mean, not pictures obviously, but the two questions are very closely related. So I want to kick off with a question to you, which is, what do you think art history is? Kamal and me were at university together almost, and we did the same art history course, so don't you answer? Actually, what is art history? What do you think art history is? The study of history of art.
Yeah.
Go on, anybody else? What is it?
Man's earliest creative work. Man's earliest creative work.
Earliest?
Yeah.
So this doesn't belong to art history?
It could be everything actually. All man's creative work.
Creative work, I think that's a good answer actually. The history of creative work. That's just a matter of interest. When does man's creative work begin?
Stone Age.
How far back can we take it?
Millions of years, I'm guessing. But it could be, in terms of a more modern approach, a couple of 100 years.
I think the first answer is better. Millions of years is probably closer. Hi, Ben. Just seating a bit more comfortable. Okay, I mean, I think the history of man's creative work is probably a very good answer. And what in fact do we study when we study history of art? Do we study the history of man's creative work?
Don't we usually study the considered masters often?
The masters? Yeah. Who are the masters?
Who are the masters? Well, I think in every culture they had defined some iconic works and define them in relation to the individual who created them.
In every culture?
In a lot of cultures, not every culture.
Name three.
Western culture, Chinese culture, Japanese culture. Yeah?
You've got it.
Three.
That's about it. In fact, here we go, here's a little cartoon. History of art. Now I study history of art, Kamal studied history of art. Does anyone else here study history of art? Of course not, you're only now. And what I studied and what I was given as a student was not a history of art at all, it was a history of Western, mainly European art. So this is actually quite a good representation of what Kamal and we studied at Leeds. We did a bit on the Renaissance, we did a bit on Dutch art, I guess, at some point. Then we came into the more modern stuff with Impressionism and post-Impressionism and so on. This is history of art, isn't it?
No.
What did you study about it?
No, this is just one facet.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What I want to get into today is that generally we have this very, very narrow conception about what history of art is, and it's generally about European, Western, in the 20th century, not before really, American, you're American?
No, Kenyan.
You're Kenyan? Yeah, you have an American accent. But Americans, 20th century. And one of the curious things is why this is the case. That we don't generally look at Chinese or Japanese or Indian or African art. The history of Western art, as I was presented with it, sort of began, I guess, somewhere about here. Although we didn't show this. Does anybody know what it is?
It says Venus.
It's a Venus, it is. Do you want to know the word?
No, it's right there.
Oh, it's
Oh, sorry.
they took it out to do it. Venus of Willendorf, this is found in Germany. And they reckon that it's about 25,000 years old. And how would you characterize this object?
Rotund.
It certainly is, yeah. It is rotund. What sort of object do you think it is? It's an image of a woman, yeah.
But it's a sculpture, right?
It's a sculpture of a woman. By the way, when I talk about imagery later, you're absolutely right. Images and includes pictures, include paintings, photographs, and film, digitized images, and everything else. Images are what you see when there's nothing there, which is an ordinary phenomenon, which is why I'm very interested in what a picture is, because we see something which isn't there. We can see a Venus of Willendorf, but she's not there, is she? Anybody want to say anything more about that? What do you think its purpose was?
Pardon me?
What do you think its purpose was?
An idol? Is it an idol?
What's an idol?
Something
Did you
Worship.
So it's connected with religious belief, you think? Okay, it could be. Anything else? Well, by the way, why do you think it's connected with religious belief?
because of Venus and the connection between how they saw that image of women back then as the ideal.
It's ideal. Could be. Quite easy, could be. I mean, we do tend to associate all kinds of imagery with religious belief, because images have been used extensively in religious belief, because they're not kind of mystical in themselves. Anybody got any more ideas about what this might be? Or used for? We have no idea, girls. Nobody knows. It survived 25,000 years because it's made out of stone. If it was made out of wood, it wouldn't. But because it's made of stone, it survived. And so all we can do is sort of speculate. Who were those people 25,000 years ago? What were they doing? Well, I don't know. Maybe they were kind of worshipping things, and maybe they were bowing down to idols. And sorry, I'm not making fun of that. Maybe they were, but generally they were very primitive people, weren't they?
But the title itself is obviously affixed to it much later.
Absolutely.
So I mean, it's somebody is already speculating that this is part of Greek mythology or something, which is very contemporary compared to 25,000 years.
The term Venus. I mean, I think a lot of speculation is about sexuality, and it's about maybe it's a fertility figure that exaggerated the size of the breasts and the buttocks. Yeah, go ahead.
At that particular time, I don't think it was weighed that much. So
Sorry.
for the fact that life wasn't easy, right? I think for that particular time, I don't think there was anyone who could have weighed that size. So maybe that was someone that was either wealthy, that couldn't walk, or sick. So I don't see. Yeah, for that particular time, you couldn't have weighed that much. There was a lot of work. It's not like nowadays that you can sit and you can work at home or something like that. Then life was hard. So I don't think it was possible for them to do that.
But you know,
It's very small. Sorry about this figure.
Yeah, the some knowledge of how the size of the
Oh, the size of the body.
Yes.
yeah, but you see, the thing is, what we don't know, that's almost like prehistory. So we don't know if that's coming straight from a very wealthy kingdom. where the queen could have been highly worshipped.
Yes, and
And was
that's-
told you
exactly.
don't eat, you just sit there and eat and
So
have babies.
the fact that maybe there could be mythical for the fact that they're not seen by people. This is someone that definitely did not walk, did not do work. Then that would have been a very wealthy person.
But that's also assuming this is supposed to be somehow realistic.
What do you think it is realistic? Is it figurative?
But we don't know if it's realistic.
I mean, the assumption's always been, this is an exaggerated human form, exaggerated breasts, exaggerated buttocks, and so it's clearly something to do with how men feel about women, which is kind of an interesting assumption.
But we don't know if it's made by a woman.
Absolutely. So it could in fact be an accurate representation of the woman who lived next door.
But yeah.
However, what we're told about it is that it's primitive. And primitive, this is a definition of primitive, relating to denoting or preserving the character of an early stage of evolutionary or historical development of something, primitive mammals. This notion that there's an evolution in the history of image making. It starts off with very primitive things, and it goes through to less primitive things, which we don't know about because they didn't last. And it arrives somewhere in the, I guess 2,000 years ago with Greece and with Athens in particular, where we started making gigantic white figures out of marble. I've got some of these on slide. So this is, if you like, how the Venus of Willendorf is generally presented as a primitive figure made by primitive people in their earliest stage of their evolutionary development. If you like the next little leg in the story that I was presented with, Greece, the great Greece classical art. This figure is the Venus de Milo that's in the Louvre. And she's a giant figure, she's over 6 feet tall, and she's all white because she's made out of marble. The whiteness of these figures is actually quite interesting because they weren't white at all. This is the Palace of Athena, the Acropolis in the Parthenon in Athens. And this is the frieze that goes around the side of the, you see the top of the building. There's a frieze all the way around which is Greek warfare.
Do you know how old that one is?
Sorry?
Parthenon?
About 2,500, isn't it? I think 2,500 years ago, or BC 2,500. As we say. So the figures actually were not, as we always imagine classical Greek sculpture, to be these gigantic white gods and goddesses. They were all multicolored. And in fact, the figures were painted, they were brown. And we know that because we find microscopic bits of pigment, and which we can plot the colours for. And so the Greeks were actually brown people in those days. A little bit confusing, all those white marble statues. But that's actually, strangely enough, I think, stuck in the imagination of Europeans, that somehow Greeks were part of the Northern European peoples and they were all white. Anyhow, after this we get a resurgence of classical art with, this is Botticelli, and a return to the, if you like, this idealized aesthetic culture of the Greeks. It was called a Renaissance, the rebirth of classical understanding and classical aesthetics. Birth of Venus, the Greek myth that Venus was born of the sea. The easterly winds there on the left were blowing her to the shore, and good old Mother Nature on the right there is ready to wrap her up and take care of her. So Venus is born from the sea, she resists the elements and is nurtured by nature. Interesting notion. And we'll come back to this. This was the rebirth of classical culture in Italy. We have two areas in Europe where this sort of imagery begins to emerge. One is in Italy and one is in the Netherlands in the north. Generally these paintings will be painted for, actually who do you think this painting would be painted for? Who would commission an expensive piece of work like this? Interesting answer, the church. This is
Not
pagan.
necessarily this one, for example.
Yeah, this particular one, because it is pagan. Would the Christian church commission a pagan piece of work?
They put that in a rich family.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. It's commissioned by, I think, Lorenzo de Milanese.
Oh,
Yeah, you know about Florence, yes. Florentine prince who was very, very wealthy, but who was also really, really interested in classical culture. And he had the works of Plato translated from the Greek to Italian. He had a court that he filled with scholars to investigate this culture that they were quite literally digging up out of the ground about theory. Who were these people? And so the fascination with Greek culture was very, very strong. Anyhow, we'll come back to that issue in a minute. Venus, birth of Venus. I've done the neoclassical period, I guess 1814, Angre, French painter. Now, when we arrive at Angre, anybody know what was happening in Europe in 1814? Napoleon, the great Napoleon, who was a political idealist. Having led the War and Peace recently, which I like to write about, I came away thinking, Bonaparte, I'm really politically Bonapartiste. I mean, he was sort of socialist, but he wanted to eradicate class, he wanted to eradicate the differences between rich individuals and poor individuals, although he didn't actually do that. Anyhow, Angre painted this picture, and Angre was one of Napoleon's favorite painters because he represented the high ideals that the culture he was trying to achieve stood for. Jean-Auguste-Dominique Angre, the Grand Dueliste. Has anybody seen this picture before? Do you know what the problem is with it?
No, but
There is a kind of an issue where this leg goes actually, but there's another
And then also with the feet, that is supporting her on the bed.
oh, this foot here, this one.
Yeah.
There are bits and pieces that don't work.
Yeah, and I mean, and her hips also disproportionate.
Yeah, the hips are the thing, because to get your spine curved all the way to here, I think we need 2 extra vertebrae.
Yeah.
And so she's anatomically a bit problematic. But I would say, this is the creation of absolute total beauty in a female form, and so I have artistic license to do that. To distort for the sake of perfection. So we have with this figure, if you like, the pinnacle of the history of art. This figure is right at the top, the most cultured civilization on earth, as Napoleon thought it was. And Angre was the figure who represented the pitching that culture. That's a bit arrogant, isn't it? Okay. So we've had Western culture. It starts off back in this time, and in the 19th century, middle of the 19th century, in fact, early in the 19th century, he paints for a long period up until the 1860s. So just before what we now know as the modern movement began, this guy was the top of the tree. And you couldn't get any better than this. You couldn't get better than it in India, or in China, or in Japan, certainly not in Africa.
Are you spouting off what your teachers told you?
Yes. I make fun. You can't get any better than this, European art. And what is the characteristic of it, aside from it's anatomically a little bit problematic? Is there anything else that's the most obvious, notable?
It's Oriental influences all over the place. I mean,
Yeah. There are actually, yeah, you're right. The silk, the jewellery, it's all gathered from all over the world.
The lighting was astonishing.
The lighting is astonishing.
How light beats the lid, then also the proportions and the darkness from the side, and then the background is just dark.
Do you think we could see this kind of light in reality?
No, I think this is something that was staged. It's staged.
It's staged?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
From my opinion, I think it tried to direct what will be exposed by the light and what will be exposed.
It has a particular light characteristic. This is a photographer's light. It could well be like an early equivalent of spotlights, but it has a photographic look.
But why, does anybody find the blackness, so much of the painting is black?
Yeah.
Is that problematic for anybody else? For me? Well, I mean, I feel...
You're right, yeah.
No, I just feel that it's... I'm just thinking about... of course, this is post-Renaissance.
Yeah.
But it's like a blank. Why do we need... What does it do? Does it accentuate the woman's body? Is that why we have the blankness, the black?
Well, I doubt if, like I said before, I doubt if you could stumble into a room and find this woman lying on a bed like that, and the background be black. We find it in photographs, of course. And I guess for purposes of composition, in fact, I've not looked closely enough at this, but I think somewhere back here there are curtains, but we can't, because it's too much like an include.
So it's idealized.
Oh, we're talking idealised. But the one element of idealisation which we only recently spotted was its photographic idealisation. And I'm going to come back to that. Napoleon Bonaparte enthroned as an empire, as an emperor. Crisp, detailed, photographic. His ordinary portraits, Comtesse d'Aussainville, 1845. Same thing, there's much demand, because you could do this. And if you have a lot of money, you could have your wife made like this. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, is this also something to be commissioned by bourgeoisie?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, it was bourgeois, but it was almost like aristocratic bourgeois. Although we didn't talk about the aristocrats at this time, since 1845. Far short of the Second Revolution. I mean, beautiful pictures. This charming little scene is called the Turkish Bath. Andrew never left France, you know, so how is he managing to get this picture?
But what do you call those kind of paintings that are circular?
A rondo. Very, very difficult actually to paint in a circular format, the compositions like. Yes, it's done very well. There's a Valpasson Venus again, she keeps cropping up. You see? I think he uses something like 10 times in terms of pictures. I mean, the picture is not a picture of reality, is it? So what kind of picture is it?
Idealized.
Sorry?
Idealized.
Idealised always sort of carries that hint of ideal in some way, but it's a particular kind of ideal, isn't it? I mean, it's sexual fantasy, let's face it. And all the stories that came back to France about travellers in the Middle East. Oh gosh, it goes on now, right? And harems full of naked women. And there they all are. So it's kind of like based on a traveller's tale. Idealisation is one way of putting it, but I think fantasies, these are all fantasies. They've got nothing to do with reality at all. And in fact, the point at which, this is 1862, and we're about just a few years away from, no, in fact we're beyond the 1848 revolution, when painters working in France were looking at this sort of stuff going, hang on a minute, how much does he get paid for that? And wait a minute, what's this got to do with anything? It's like sort of internet porn. And this is what is considered to be the highest point of European culture. This is outrageous. And so painters then began to think, wait a minute, let's take a look at reality and see what reality is about, instead of these outrages. Now, just one little diversion here. This is Pablo Picasso, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, 1907, about 40 years after Martin's picture. And this is the point at which something rather interesting happens in European art. Everybody studied. By the way, this is what Picasso did the previous year.
This is when he was really changing, he was changing his style a lot
He certainly was.
during this period.
Rather pretty, rather beautiful paintings of this kind. Periods, rose period, blue period, all these periods. And he was good. He made really attractive paintings. These are his friends. Picasso's there on the left, and there's a Harlequin. The big guy is Apollinaire. The lady on the right, you lose track, but she's one of his girlfriends.
Yeah.
And he's painted them as acrobats. Acrobats travel around, they don't stay in one place, they're up to all kinds of interesting things. And so he's identified himself with the saltimbanque, I think they'll call these traveling acrobats. So this is a year before, and then he paints this.
What happened?
I think he met was it an anthropologist who has just been to Africa, and he had this vast collection of African masks and Egyptian stuff. So from there he gets the fascination, and I think at that period he was also emotionally disturbed, I think. So he just wanted to something new, both with himself emotionally, but also with his work.
That's a very good answer. Emotionally disturbed, politically disturbed. Picasso, I guess from the point when he came into Paris in about 1900, was politically. He was kind of involved in anarchism, and he was involved in the politics of the Spanish-American War. And in fact, about this time, the Sûreté in Paris, the secret police of Paris, had a dossier on Picasso this thick. He was folded everywhere because he was a suspect. He thought he was a bomb thrower. So politically and emotionally, quite right, there were problems in Picasso's life. But and you're quite right when he comes across African masks. I didn't know about the anthropologist, but I'm checking out. But I know he went to, there's a museum in France with no guards on it, because it was considered to, African art was considered to be, have no value at all, so we want to steal it. The same with this figure. I don't think it's Egyptian. I think that there's a drawing by Picasso of an ancient Iberian piece of sculpture. Ancient Spanish, that Napoleon had stolen all this stuff, as Napoleon wandered around conquering Europe, he'd send the wagons in and they'd take everything back to Paris, which is the Louvre. It contains all of the looted cultures of the world, amongst which is ancient Iberian sculpture. The Louvre put on an exhibition of ancient Iberian sculpture. Sorry, this is a bit of a departure. And Picasso went to see it. And of course there were no guards, because same reason, who'd want to steal this? It's just useless crap from Spain. Picasso steals a piece.
Oh.
He has a big coat. I've seen self-portrait with a big coat with these big pockets and so on. Off he goes. And he made drawings of it. In his apartment in Montmartre, he made these drawings. And why would Picasso steal a piece of ancient Iberian sculpture for the Louvre?
Obviously he was inspired by it.
In what way?
Well, it was so different from what was considered classical, it was acceptable, and he was rebelling. I mean, if you say he had a political streak, then he was probably also politically rebellious against the art of the day.
This is getting closer. Being inspired by this is generally the story we're told in the art history books again, that Picasso, genius that he was, saw an African mask and saw its aesthetic beauty, and saw the Iberian sculpture and saw its aesthetic beauty, sticks him in this picture, and lo and behold, Picasso, the man who can see what nobody else can see. Because the general opinion of Iberian sculpture was that this is primitive and it's rubbish, because primitive art is rubbish. They don't know what they're doing, there's no skill involved, they don't see the world where we see it, it's a sort of primitive ritualistic culture. Parisians in 1907 would have seen African art as the product of a sort of subhuman people. They would have seen African art as something which is the antithesis of art. It shouldn't be called art at all, because it's the antithesis of art. This is the culture that Picasso was living in. Now, does it make sense to think, well, Picasso, being the genius he was, obviously didn't pay any attention to that, he just saw the natural beauty in the carving. I don't think it does. I think Picasso, like everybody else, would have thought, interesting stuff, but wow, who outlaid these here? Right, so we've got African Mass number 1, African Mass number 2, and a bit of Iberian sculpture over here. What about the rest of the figures? In fact, what about the composition? Let's go back again. Look at this figure here, and this figure here, and this figure here, and this figure here. She's the wrong way around, actually. Can't figure that. Yeah.
Would he be doing that? Would he be emulating that previous piece?
When I was studying art history, in fact, I think even up until quite recently, nobody of the people I've read made any connection between this picture and the other. And a kind of interesting reason why you wouldn't make that connection, but it seems to me to be blatantly obvious.
But where
This is referring to Anne.
was the Angre in the Louvre?
Yes.
So he could have popped over from one gallery to another inside the Louvre and seen, oh, look at that. Oh, look at that.
Yeah, they could have done
I
it.
think I'll go home and take a
And
look at
do
that.
this to it.
Yeah, he could
I'll
have
do
taken
this to it.
sketches of the other one.
What's it done to it? It's got this figure. Is she facing backwards or front? She's twisted and slashed. This figure always slashing. This, by the way, is the first, if you like, the paper that initiated Cubism. Look at this figure over here. This is from a man who can do that. When this picture was first seen by his friends in Montmartre, Paris, I think it was George Braque. It didn't go in that well at that time. He said to him, Pablo, for God's sake, don't show that in public. They'll lynch you.
But then Braque became a Cubist.
He did indeed, he worked with it. Yeah. What would he mean by that? Don't show this in public because they'll lynch you. And in my understanding of art history, and he didn't join it again, he rolled it up, put it in the corner of the studio, and nobody saw it until 1920. He took Braque's advice, quite sensibly, because of what the reaction would be to this. It's probably the greatest potential reaction to any work of art ever made. And I say that advisedly because we don't want that back into the 5,000 years ago. But anyway, why would he say that? Sorry?
It's going back. The simplification of Cubism.
It's very primitive.
Yeah, we're not at Cubism yet. This is the first one,
Yeah.
which grew out of that picture. But this picture is being referred to. The artist is being referred to. Yeah.
Maybe just connect this work and something like the Guernica, also another, is it Guernica or?
Guernica is a lot later, it's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
30s.
But then I just want to like use the two comparisons.
It's good comparison.
Yeah. At this point, French was like the capital of, I don't know if it was the capital, cultural capital of the world.
They certainly thought of themselves that way.
Yeah, they thought of themselves that way. And then Ingres was one of their biggest artists, and
He's the icon of French culture.
yeah. And then Picasso distorting his work and then introducing also African masks
Yes.
into his work. I think it was more like an insult, sort of insulting their culture and come to Africa and stole some of their stuff. For example,
Yeah.
why can't the stuff that was stolen get itself into their lives? Because here we have a museum that is well protected, and then you go to a certain section, it's not protected because nobody will care.
This stuff wasn't on the Louvre, by the way. It's a small.
Yeah, but it's not in the Louvre. But in the Louvre we have African relics and sculptures that are shown in the Louvre. Yeah. But then in that section it's not protected because nobody cares about it. And then you have another section.
That would make them care.
Yeah, that. So I think he was also maybe protesting, apart from just telling them, fuck you guys, but maybe he was also protesting because you have two cultures in the same setup. One is protected and deemed as important. The other one is just for the sake of being there. We even don't know why in the first place they placed them there if they could not.
I think my answer to that is, sorry about that, just let me answer this,
No.
because I think it's a crucial thing. This is not far short of the abolition of slavery.
No, it's not about abolition of slavery.
No,
I would
but
say it's that
I'm
soon
thinking
after.
about the way in which European people, a good many European people would have seen African people and the products of African people. To enslave people in the way that it occurred, you could only see African people as subhuman. You couldn't regard them as human beings like yourself. If you did, how on earth could you be involved in the slave trade? So much of contemporary racism and 19th century racism had its origins there, and it's still, you know, you can sit here Trump, you can realise that we're still picking it up. So I think that had Napoleon, and in fact he went to Egypt and fought a battle of the Nile, and whilst he was in Egypt, so the story goes, the Sphinx, I don't know how true this is, it's a sort of apocryphal story, but the Sphinx has no nose, and the story is that Napoleon pointed a cannon at the Sphinx because it had an African face, and he blew off the nose. So Napoleon had absolutely no trouble with Africa, except what he could potentially pillage from North Africa and Egypt. So these things would not have found their way into the Louvre. Where they found their way, too interestingly enough, was in the flea market. What's it called? Clignancourt flea market in Paris. Still you can find African carvers carving away and making things which are very similar to the things that Picasso's drawing. I'll come on to that point in a minute. Sorry, not that you.
No, I was just going to say that even if I, in 1907, if I had seen that and I didn't know anything about Napoleon or African, whatever, it's still, I would say, that treatment of women, you know, we have these, whether it's idealized or whatever, or realistic or semi-realistic or whatever, but these, how can you make a woman look like maybe a monkey?
Mm-hmm.
Or how can you make a woman who is a white woman have a black face? And how can you distort someone's, I mean, these distortions of themselves would be disconcerting, right? I mean, in light of what people have been doing. Because as you were pointing at the Picasso of 1905, those characters were all pretty much realistic. I mean, they were distorted to a certain extent, but they still had realistic faces.
Yep.
And this is not realistic.
No, it's not realism at all. I mean, it's hard to get into the mindset of someone seeing this in 1907 in the context of an art market there, which is impressionism, post-impressionism and beautiful things, to see this and understand what Picasso's doing is that the man is insane. How could he possibly perform this obscenity? Anyway, Picasso took the advice and rolled it up and didn't show it in public. The next exhibition Picasso has, we're into kind of what now is thought of as like analytical cubism. But he spent a year making drawings for this. These are some of them.
You spent a year making drawings for that one painting?
Well, these are sort of painting drawings.
Wow.
But the research for it was took a long time. This was going to be, it's on the scale of a master work. This is my master work for 1907, as was the Acrobats.
But this reflects a very profound change of thought.
It is very profound. Now, if I'm right, this is actually, Picasso is if you like, subverting. These are subversive images. He's subverting the culture in which he finds himself a part, the French culture. I won't go on too much about this because I might come back to it at a later stage. But there's Picasso being a suspected anarchist and being followed around and stealing this piece of sculpture from the Louvre. It's mine after all. What are you doing with this, you bastards? And it's political. It's subversive. This particular picture, or one like it, I couldn't find the one that I wanted. Actually, just before I go on to that, I think what it represents and what the representation of art history of Picasso and the Demoiselle d'Avignon shows us is how somehow the mythology of art history distorts what you can see. To see this picture as influenced by Anne, to see this picture as being indebted to African art, it just seems to me to be utter nonsense, but this is the way it's presented. Now, another example of how we can be misled by art history. I have a figure which is very similar to this. Except it's not quite, I can't find the drawing of the one that when I first saw this figure, it jumped out because that's one of Picasso's drawings. And it was a figure that I got in Iceland, Sierra Leone, in West Africa. And the art in Sierra Leone is astonishing. Tribal art is extraordinary. But we used to be able to go down to a place called the Basket Market in Freetown, where they sold baskets. But they also sold these carvings made out of cottonwood, which is a bit like balsa, it's very easy to carve. And have a look at these. Really quite beautiful things like that. And all painted black. And the closest I can get to it, this is another drawing from the Demoiselle. Just the way he's using the brush, it's like he's using like a knife.
Where did you find these?
These?
The sketches?
Yeah, the drawings, they're all on the internet.
Well, they're all over everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, feel free to jot down these things and look them up because it's the most... I mean,
That's a mess.
it's a mask, but... This is a particular way of mark making, which is not about making it long. It's not beautiful at all. There's something altogether different. This is quite recent. A new form of art called, what's it called? The new mythology. African sculpture. And here's the Demoiselle. Modern primitivism. So the notion of the primitive associated with African art is still there and it continues. African stuff.
Distinctly primitivist.
Yes, primitivist. Primitivism, you put an ism on it. So it's like evolutionary backwards. It's an ism in art.
No, but I think something you're saying that's very interesting is that you're taking the concept of evolution as a theory. Evolution isn't by definition reality. It's a theoretical construct that we have bought into. So primitive is backwards, and they're still back there. And, that's what makes Picasso interesting. And we are so enlightened to now recognize that Africa had a role in Picasso's art. I mean, it's taken them decades to figure that out.
So we're still there.
Huh?
We're still there. We're still there in the West, art historians regarding the stuff that was happening in the Demoiselle as primitive.
What is primitive mean? Primitive is simply they do not understand what they meant, that's why they call it primitive. How do you call it something that you don't understand primitive?
No, he's got this definition.
Oh. That makes no sense. So long as it doesn't fall in your scope, it's primitive.
An early stage of evolutionary or historical development.
That's a dictionary.
Yes. But I mean, that I think is primitive mammals, of course. So that we have this notion that human beings at one time were very primitive, and then evolved into this super, sort of people that we are now. But apart from Africa, of course, because they're still primitive over there, and like primitive mammals, primitive human beings. An early stage in. This is the mythology that art history presents us with. Okay, I'll just go back and.
Is John Coulter a famous art critic, or what was he?
John Coulter is a painter who works in a style that he calls the New Mythology. And he staged an exhibition in New York, I think in 2008, called modernism and feminism.
So he's reinforcing really what you're critiquing right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, they still live it. They still live it. These figures are the closest I can get to the figure I have in the attic of my house in the UK. The figure I have in the attic of my house doesn't look very much like this, although it shares certain characteristics. But I think they're the same, made out of cottonwood, and probably the same sort of objects you pick up in the basket market in Freetown,
But it's
and we sell quite widely. Sorry?
I say it's beautiful.
Well, the figure I have is like this, except it's like this. Bent knees, bum sticking out, boobs there, and holding the boobs. And I thought, wow, this is fantastic, that dynamic form. And it's so rough-hewn, and I loved it. I used to put it on the table in my apartment in Freetown. And I thought it was fantastic. I thought, this is what Picasso saw back then in 1970. And he must have seen the beauty in it. I thought. Anyhow,
Maybe I'm going mad.
sorry?
Oh, I mean, you're thinking, what am I thinking?
No, that's how I bought all this stuff. I thought this, Picasso must have seen the aesthetic quality in after a month. One of my friends came around one night and this is all Mende, is the tribe that at the university there had a lot of Mende students, and there were, one of my friends was the head of the students' union, Mohammed Bar. And he came out for a drink one night and he looked at this figure and he just fell about and cracked up. He said, where the hell did you get that? And I said, I think down at the basket market. He said, it was amazing things down there. I said, I know. I said, you know what they are? I don't know. It was some sort of tribal thing. I didn't know what it was. He said, no, it's not. I mean, it's tribal, it's mainly, but you know what's you for? Ancestors? Ancestors? No, in Sierra Leone they had secret societies. The culture was actually run by the women's secret society, was the most powerful by far. Secret in a kind of interesting way. A lot of anthropologists used to come to Freetown to study the secret societies to try and find out what the secrets of it all were. It was generally where young girls were initiated and FGM and so on. But it was also about how women learned to control men. And men, they had secret societies where they used to go to the Poro Society every Friday night and get pissed on palm wine like men do. And when they'd had enough palm wine and they're having a good time, somebody would fish out one of these figures and slam it on the floor, and everybody would fall out laughing. And I said, why would they do that? He said, well, look at it. She's got this gigantic head, she's got no bum, she's got short, stocky legs. And she's going, look at my beautiful breasts. And it was a sort of vanity thy name is woman. It was taking the piss out of women. It was like a joke figure. The women had them as well, because I noticed in the basket market, I bought some, and they were like a totem pole. It's all carved all the way down this piece of wood. And they're all figures of men with enormous penises holding them like this. I thought, wow, must be some sort of fertility thing. And what it was, of course, was the women would take these to the bundu hut, and everybody fall about with, yeah, typical men, they all think they've got the biggest dick in the world, yeah. And so they weren't anything to do with, you bring all this stuff with you about what these figures are for, and they're tribal, and they must be to do with all these things I've learned about. No, they were in fact like this.
My teeny, weenie.
These are very, very popular in the UK. They used to be. Saucy postcards. When you went to the seaside for your holidays, you get these postcards and you send them home whenever you have a good laugh. They were made in a factory in a village near where I used to live in Yorkshire, called Hornfirth. Bampus of Hornfirth made saucy postcards.
So that's a village, that's a town.
No, Hornfirth is the village, Bampus is the name of the man who ran the factory.
So it's a man was he the artist?
No. There were dozens of different artists. I think there was one very famous one, not this guy, who made, it's all women with enormous boobs and innuendos generally in the corners. And you can't, not 1,000 miles from this, you see.
Oh my God. So is this all about mockery of women?
Well, I can't possibly say, because it's, we don't know. But it strikes me that if I could miss, or if all of us could miss what some of this African carving was about in West Africa, then we could equally miss what this was about too. And it might actually be that, and there are dozens of these things found, they're all over Northern Europe. And so they were obviously very popular. And I go, oh, it's a fertility goddess. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's something else. And what I'm saying is that we miss it. We sort of miss the point. And art history teaches us to miss the point. If that makes sense.
Oh wow.
This, by the way, is a tribal mask. It's a bundu mask. The girls who were being initiated would wear this, and it's a helmet mask. It was right over your head. Hence the shape of it. In fact, almost always you can figure out what these things were for by looking at how they were made and what they were for and so on, the purposes behind them. So this is a helmet mask. The girl would wear it, covered in raffia so none of her body's exposed, and she would dance. And it was called the devil dance because the girls danced with the devil. Not the devil as in the Christian devil, but the devil as in the spirit of the bundu. And when she danced, this thing came alive. And it was extraordinary to see. Like with any mask, any African mask, it needs to move, it needs to, when you dance with a mask then comes alive, and what the mask is giving to the person wearing it comes alive. It's an extraordinary phenomenon. Has anybody experienced that?
Is this in wood?
This is cottonwood again, yeah.
Now, does the mask go over the eyes? Does it reach that, or is it above the eye level?
No, these holes are the eye holes. Unless it's a fake, of course. I came across one that was a fake where they'd forgotten to put holes in the eyes. But you don't. Can't see it. So its use, its purpose, determines its appearance and determines how it's made and what it's made for. And in this case, it was a mask that you want to dance.
So you know this is the woman's mask,
Yes.
and this is the hair. This is
The hair is kind of interesting.
it's very beautiful.
It is.
All those designs.
They have all sorts of symbolic sexual meaning and which I'll go into. But this is an FGM ceremony.
Oh dear.
Now the notion that these primitive things came out of a culture that was primitive, which was the mythologies have been promulgated the best part of several hundred years, is so obviously and ridiculously false. We have civilizations in Africa. We have the civilization of Benin. This is from Ife in Nigeria, part of the Benin Empire. The Malian civilization, the Zimbabwean civilization, the Great Zimbabwe. Has anybody been to the Great Zimbabwe? is quite astonishing. Zimbabwe, the Great Zimbabwe, which Zimbabwe's name, is an enormous citadel.
Enormous what?
Citadels. With small citadels all around it. And built out of huge blocks of stone, which it's rather like those pictures you might have come across of Peruvian Andean architecture. Very large blocks of stone, not obvious how they could have been put there, but up to 30 feet high, the wall around the city. And I went to see it. I thought, wow. So what happened here? And I was given a book. And the book told me that this was built by the Queen of Sheba, who came down the Nile and entered the southern African plains and built this extraordinary citadel. What? Queen of Sheba? How does this sound? That's what Africans would do, don't they? All the evidence for African civilization in that period, and this is about 15th century, with the exception of a few small artifacts that were in a little museum there, but all of the evidence, all the archaeological evidence have been destroyed. It's been wiped out. In the interest of serving Mr. Ian Smith's regime, that Africans are still these primitive peoples who we rule over innocently.
You mean they actually, the Brits actually demolished?
The Lincoln Great Zimbabwe is far too big to demolish. But they destroyed all the artifacts that archaeologists had unearthed. They're still working on it, and apparently now there's evidence that the Great Zimbabwe was trading with China, was trading with India, and was trading with Europe. And so this is a greater, more powerful empire than the British Empire and Queen Elizabeth at the same time of history. These statues, these are made out of bronze. This is Ife, Benin. And these statues were made using the same smelting methods in bronze as Michelangelo used about 100 years later. They're stunning things. So many of these were destroyed when the Brits invaded Nigeria, went to a country and found Benin, and wiped out as much of that as they could. But these were made out of bronze, so they survived. A lot of them were smashed up. They found the remains of the smashed sculptures. Now, you kind of think, so why do we think of African art as primitive? This is the most sophisticated, figurative, realistic sculpture you could find anywhere in the world.
Wow. Is that bronze?
Bronze, 13th century. Ife. So I guess what I'm saying is that part of the reason that our history is shaped the way that it is, it's about European and Western art history. And part of the reason we don't even entertain African art as having a history, as having origins and developments in the same way we do European art history, is as you all know, for historical reasons.
And political reasons.
Very much political reasons. And I think these are absolutely stunning, actually. What's it more? Right, I'm going to change tack. I've got tired. I'm going to start with this. Back to that issue about the relationship between understanding art and understanding human beings. And it turns about the issue of what a picture is, how we see what we see. What does this mean? Sorry?
It's not a pipe.
What isn't a pipe?
That's only states in French.
Sorry?
It says in French, it's not a,
It is a set of French.
yeah.
The next question is this, what isn't a pipe?
It's a cigarette, you know.
It's
Smoking,
smoking.
smoking.
Can you smoke it? No, what's not a pipe? Yeah, but what isn't a pipe?
The image.
The image.
The image isn't a pipe, no. I mean, the image is,
It is.
in this case, flashing lights, and the flashing lights on the pipe, that's for sure. We see a pipe.
It looks like a pipe my grandmother used to.
It looks like a pipe. What looks like a pipe? Wait, back in there. I mean, we see a pipe. How do we see a pipe? Tom,
See a pipe.
how?
Because the first time I saw something like that, I was told it's a pipe.
Well, it looks like a pipe, doesn't it? What looks like a pipe? I mean, if I made it out of a piece of sculpture, maybe you've got a case, and you could even, perhaps even carve it so that it looks just like a pipe. Where's that? In fact, this rather lovely castle drawing. Four lines, no? 1, 2, 3 lines. How can I see what I see when I look at 3 lines? Was the one that's spotting? Anyway, no, before I knew any of this stuff, I started thinking about it. I thought, I don't know, I'll make a sculpture of a chair out of paper. And so I built this, and it was life size. And when I finished it, I left it in the studio overnight. When I came back the next day, there was all hell to pay because one of the caretakers had sat on it. It was back. And I said, what are you doing? I said, it's not a chair. I don't know, it looks like a chair. And I know, so he made me scrunch up one of the legs so you could see that it wasn't a chair. And that made me start to ponder on this notion that both in 3 dimensions and in 2 dimensions, we see stuff that isn't there. How does that happen? How does it occur? When I'm painting, I find the same sort of a thing that I could put a mark in a certain place. There's 2 things that happen when you're painting. Well, it's like artists, but you're working on the surface and you're putting marks down. And you're putting marks down in a sort of abstract way, so that this mark in some way relates to that, and I put that mark like that, and so on the surface. And then there's another thing that's going on is I put a mark there, and that's a shadow on the back of the hand. So I'm both seeing into the picture space. This is picture space. Where this body isn't in real space, it's in picture space, which is a kind of interesting notion. The picture space is the space that extends beyond the wall. There isn't a space there, it's a wall. No, right? Now, how we get to the picture space is what I said. So when you're painting and you're doing this, you've got this, it's like a kind of dialectic between the stuff in the picture and the stuff at the surface. And you're working that all the time. And those of you who are painters must be, does that sound familiar? I love Cézanne because Cézanne is all about surface. At first, that mark necessitates that mark, necessitates that mark, and so on. And then, at a certain point, you're into a space. And it's the same space that Picasso's always said. It's that picture space. Picture space. Picture space. Where is picture space?
Are you asking?
Yeah. Where's picture space?
It's in your head.
Where do you think that?
Everything's in your head.
Absolutely. It's in your head. I don't know how far to go into this because I'm getting a bit turgid, but there's a philosopher called Wittgenstein who came up with the notion that to understand what it's like to think, thinking is irrelevant. Well, it's central to a lot of philosophers' interests, what thinking is and what reality is, and what we are. Thinking seems to be connected to language, in that we can form propositions in our heads, sunshine, and those propositions can be true or false, and so on. So thinking seems to be connected to language. But Wittgenstein, without developing any notion about picture seeing, said that there was something else that extended the language into meaning, and this was something called seeing as, our ability to see one thing as another. If I say to you guys, that's the Eiffel Tower, can you all see it? Is it the Eiffel Tower? Can you see the Eiffel Tower? Okay, what happens now? The Eiffel Tower's fallen down. Seeing one thing as another, Wittgenstein thought, was actually central to the way that thinking and language operated. It's rather like metaphor. And I think you started off by saying that the history of art is the history of creativity. What we're doing when we see one thing as another is playing a kind of mind-creative game. If Wittgenstein's right, then picture seeing as, is as fundamental to human thinking as is language. If I say to you guys now, form a picture of someone you love, you will do. Does anybody can't do that? I came across some people who can do that all the time. Can you do that? Maybe you can't. Okay, is it photographic? What sort of picture is it? Think of coin.
It would be a line drawing like that.
It would be a line drawing. That's easier now. You think of drawing. So if it's just form a picture in your mind, what would the picture contain? You see, we all of us will probably do this. In my wallet, I have a little picture of mine all the time. But that's not like the one I've got in my head. Yeah, I can see the one in my head still. Sam?
Memories.
Memories.
Anything else?
Spatial, physical material.
It could be physical appearance. I like to think that it's the picture I have of my daughter in my head is everything that I know about her. Not just her appearance. Her appearance changes day by day, so, but everything that I know about her doesn't. So I think that mental pictures and mental images are sort of take us into getting some sort of idea about what this is. And this is why I started off by thinking that what a picture is and what we are as human beings is, if you like, two sides of the same issue. They touch each other so intimately. What a picture is what I am as a human being. Because it's fundamental to my thinking, to my consciousness, and to my being in the world. All of my perceptions, my visual perceptions, my auditory perceptions, are informed by that. I don't simply have a blank canvas that reality prints all this stuff on and I've got to work it out. I bring that to reality and it shapes reality. If I keep going on with this, it's going to get a bit hard. So I'm going to stop sort of about here. What a picture is, but I'll say one more thing, which is that all human beings, wherever they were in history, wherever we came from, have that facility. You might want to call it the creative facility, because consciousness is as much about creativity as it is about receiving. That conscious creativity that we have is manifested in every one of us, and every one of us can, if you like, every culture can make the sculptures of Ife if it has a particular purpose that requires it. Every culture can make Jackson Pollocks if it has a purpose and a culture that requires it. So there isn't a sort of evolution of art history. I'll take a point about the importance of evolution, but there isn't an evolution of art history. It has always been there, it's always been the same, and it's the most, if you like, the most fundamental facility of a human being. Now, before I stop, I'll just show you some more images, just to, if you like, wrap around that notion. This is Lascaux in northern France. I mean, you've all come across these cave buildings made by cavemen, primitive. In some ways, the Lascaux pictures reinforce that idea that they're rather primitive drawings of animals. 15,000 years ago, people were making these in southern France.
15,000 BC.
15,000 BC.
I think that's what you said.
Yeah. Now, for a long time, these drawings in Lascaux in Spain, Altamira, and they did find some in Australia, rock art in Australia and Botswana. A lot of rock art which looked rather similar to this, and so we were making those sort of drawings then, but early man and all, a bit primitive. They hadn't learned how to draw like long way back. And then about 20 years ago, another cave was discovered. The Chauvet Cave.
Where is it?
It's in the Ardèche in southern France, in sort of south-eastern France. In a limestone area, the cave was a function of being eroded by water. And they did the carbon dating on the charcoal that was found at the bottom of the drawings, and it takes us back to, I put the date on that. This is 30,000 years ago, twice as long ago as the other ones. The cave was found by a climber called Chauvet. He was a potter. And he came across a seam in the rock that was filled with clay, and he scooped all the clay out, and there was a kind of rush of air. So all very dramatic. The rush of air went into the cave, and the cave had been hermetically sealed probably for 25, 30,000 years. Nobody had been in there. And so these things were perfectly preserved. This is like cave painting in Aztec. And what they discovered, in fact this is the replica, because they sealed it up again. Because the caves in Lascaux and Altamira had all been destroyed by human breath condensation. So we can't let people go in there. So they sealed it up and they built a replica. These are the original drawings. I remember when this was discovered, I wrote a book, and this is astonishing. I also wrote a book called The Mind in the Cave. The Mind in the Cave, which reckoned that the Lascaux and Altamira art was all about people putting some sort of herbal acid and putting all these colours in. But I thought it was nonsense. But these drawings just blew me away. I'll just take you through the ones I've got here. So,
Those rhinos.
Yep. They're fighting. They're fighting rhinos.
They look like a zebra. I know.
Look at this. There's lines up there. Look at this rhino here, which is drawn it as if it's charging towards you, or charging. This is animated. Bear. hyena, an owl, about 2 owls, and a horse underneath. And then this one, this is made with handprints in the form of a bison or something, but this is like a sort of something experimenting in almost like divisionism or pointillism.
Like leopards. Oh wow.
But anyhow, what occurred to me about these is that this isn't some sort of ritualistic, the story about the Altamira caves in Moscow is that they probably drew these on the walls and then pretended to be hunting them and so on in a primitive kind of way. These are not primitive at all, in the way that people regard art as primitive. I mean, this is like a sketchbook. And this is in perspective. One overlapping another, overlapping another. So we've got perspective, we've got
This is like an animation.
chiaroscuro, we've got animation of it. Absolutely.
Like animation.
The rhino one is my favourite. It's nice. We've got chiaroscuro. Light and shade to make something look solid. And this is 30,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Not so long after African people came to Europe.
No, I love it. It's fantastic.
These horses, I mean, there's studies of horses for God's sake. And you can see different hands, you can see some which are better than others. Or somebody who's practiced a bit more, or better.
And usually they're found inside caves where they are not destroyed by weather. That's how they get that.
Obviously, it has to be sealed in if it's the last. Stuff on paper, stuff on wood, stuff on anything perishable isn't going to last this amount of time. Just go up to the. Sorry, I'm skipping. I mean, this guy's not very good. He's just he hasn't got the hang of it yet. The lines don't look quite right.
But the rhinos look good. Some of them.
Rhinos are splendid, aren't they? This is southern France, by the way. Like the Sangha you play in France. Now this is quite, it recurs quite a lot in cave art. The hand. It's done by putting your hand against the, in this case it's his right hand, so maybe his left hand. And you put stuff in your mouth, you put spirit in your mouth and like, spray paint, spit on it. Take your hand away, that's the hand. A lot of people used to think it's a sort of signature. This guy has lost the top joint of his thumb by the look of it. But to me it's just the amazement of somebody seeing their hand when it's not there. Seeing something that's not there. And possibly about identity as well. One more. This is probably 50,000 years old.
Is this like carbon dating that?
Yes, you can date the charcoal, when they use charcoal, the charcoals, it can be carbon dated. And this I think is Neanderthal, and the picture is still out on it. So not only of human beings, all of us have that same facility. It's what almost defines us as human beings. People who are our closest relative, our forebears, for 2-3 million years, if this is Neanderthal, then Neanderthals have that same facility. And we now begin to understand that Neanderthals had language. And Neanderthals had aesthetic sense of all the sort of things that we do. We tend to think of Neanderthal people as primitive. Well, we read the evolution, but they're not. They probably have that same facility that we have, and have always had.